Hello and welcome to another update. In this one I'll be covering the latest developments from the front line, and this one will be a short one as there isn't a lot of updates compared to usual. But let's get straight into it. Starting out by the Bakhmut front, we see that fighting continues heavily by Klishchiivka as both sides attempt to gather some forces and capture some territories, as the Ukrainians want to gain full control over the village, which would essentially give them a major advantage here in the southern flank of Bakhmut. And the Russian forces are trying to recapture the fortifications, both the north one and the south one. However, since the north one is more important and it is closer to the front line, they're focusing on that. However, they need to hold both of them if they want to fully secure Klishchiivka. But essentially what is happening is that the Ukrainian forces are throwing a lot of forces into this. They are also not holding back when it comes to the amount of artillery they're using. So the firepower seems to be somewhat more equal than the firepower advantage to the Russian forces usually is. And then the Russian forces are continuously trying to send reinforcements to this part of the front line as they try to gather enough forces to actually hold on to the village and push the Ukrainians back so that they can regain control over the fortifications. So all of this heavy fighting around Klishchiivka actually indicates that the importance of this village is very significant, and considering the geography and the fortifications we know the Russian forces have built, it is essentially the only main fortification area that the Russians have to the south of Bakhmut. And as I've analyzed prior to this, a lot of fighting by Klishchiivka, the main two areas the Ukrainians will attempt to push through the Bakhmut area would be in the south to try and reach this main road between Bakhmut and the Russian supply lines to the southeast, and from the north towards Soledar, capturing Soledar, and essentially fighting all the way up to the village of Pokrovsk, which will allow the Ukrainian forces to completely cut off supplies to Bakhmut. So essentially there are these main roads that need to be cut off, the one to the Soledar area, the one by the Pokrovsk area, and that would essentially be enough because if the Ukrainian forces are able to actually take control over Pokrovsk, they would essentially cut off this intersection here to the east of Bakhmut. The main issue for the Ukrainians would be that the Russian forces have a lot of concentrated forces in this area. So essentially they would need a large enough force to actually match that so that the Ukrainian forces, after cutting off the supplies, don't end up just getting overrun and their flanks being cut off, which would allow the Russian forces to reverse the situation. They would also need to actually push at the Russian positions to prevent them from doing offensive operations in the direction of the Ukrainian forces. The Ukrainian forces will also need to fortify their flanks to prevent the Russian forces from doing any of operations that would essentially cut them off. So that is the general situation by the Bakhmut area. And we have to take a look at the area to the southwest of Svatove, here to the west of the village of Karmasinivka. And according to the latest update by Deep State Map, the Russian forces have managed to expand their zone of control to the west of the river line, where they have actually managed to capture this whole area. So they have managed to expand their zone of control west of the river line and their beachhead across with a significant amount. This was captured according to Deep State Map over the last 24 hours. In comparison, these were taken much earlier. So the Russian forces are fighting through across the beachhead and actually gathering further forces across, which indicates that they are planning some sort of offensive maneuver here to the west of Karmasinivka. So this indicates that the Russian forces have big plans with this beachhead across, and that they may see some further offensive operations in this part of the front line. Then we take a look at the Zaporizhzhia front. We're starting out in the Orehiv area to the north of Robotyne. The fighting continues here, especially tough with the Ukrainian forces continuously sending wave after wave in this direction. According to the Archangel of the Special Forces, the Ukrainians have sent wave after wave, with the latest one being an offensive with the force of 2 tanks, 3 Bradleys, and infantry up to 70 people. That is a total of 100 people, or approximately a company-sized unit. Now, why are they fighting with company-sized units? To be honest, I don't know. And that is because we see throughout this offensive from day one, which was the 4th of June, to now the 22nd of July, there's been a month and a half, and the Ukrainian forces have yet to reach the first line of defense, which begs to question, is it enough? No, it's not. They're not sending enough forces to actually reach the first line of defense. And with the current situation, the Russian minefields, air firepower superiority, their actual air force, there's a lot of factors we have to count in. And sending company-sized units out, essentially, well, this is the result. Capturing a couple of fields in a month's time. This is 10th, 14th, and 20th of July. To capture most of this field, it has taken many, many days. So it's a terrible strategy, I would say, considering that they haven't even reached Robotyne yet. Or, well, it could be considered reaching Robotyne, since they have control over this area. That would mean they have reached Robotyne. So the Ukrainians have managed to reach Robotyne after a month and a half of fighting. That is just not good enough results for anything, and it's not really worth it. Following that report, we got another report this morning from the Archangel of the Special Forces, which shows a couple of videos and pictures. And essentially at 6 in the morning, the Ukrainian forces launched another company-sized unit. And then at 6:30 in the morning, another unit was again launched. So there was one unit before nighttime, and then 2 units in the morning time. And as far as has been reported and what has been followed up by the latest report by RUAF, the offensive failed and essentially they lost a bunch of units in this direction. And there was also a secondary attack from the direction of Melatukmashka in the direction of Novopokrovka. So essentially what we are seeing is that the Ukrainians launch company after company after company, for some reason always in company size, and then they attempt to break through the Russian defenses in this area, try to break through the minefields, and actually reach the Russian positions. I believe until the Ukrainians manage to actually clear a minefield at some point, at a specific point, they would have to wait with concentrating their forces. And what is very weird to me is that they're not focusing on one point, they're focusing across the whole front line. And at the point where they have to go through minefields, that is a huge mistake, as they would have to go through many minefields across the whole front line instead of focusing at one point, because if they focus the units in one point, then they can clear the mines from that area and they would be able to launch their main spearhead. But they keep complaining that they don't have the air force, they don't have the necessary firepower, but in the end their tactics are also failing. Moving on to the next point, there has been a lot of complaints by a specific grouping of my viewership. The complaints that don't talk about the ammo depots being destroyed on both sides of the front line. I'll give the benefit of the doubt and assume they mean both sides. And then the reason I don't report on that is because I do not believe it is at all to a point where it makes any difference. If the Ukrainians destroy 10 ammo depots in Crimea, or if Russia destroys 10 ammo depots in Zaporizhzhia, I don't think it will make much of a difference, because generally these ammo depots hold a lot of ammo, yes, but both sides can just transport a new amount of ammo to the front line. So generally, from my perspective, I don't think this is something that can be measured, and therefore I don't believe it is necessary to look at this. And if we take a general look from the start, from day one of the offensive till today, am willing to bet with you that the Russians have destroyed so much more ammo depots than the Ukrainians have, considering how many missiles the Russians have launched, and considering that, generally speaking, the Russian anti-air defense is much better than the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians are using old Soviet S-300 systems mainly, especially from day one until December last year. And the Russians would have both S-300 systems, S-400 systems, and they have much more of them than the Ukrainians have. So generally speaking, the possibility that the Ukrainians have destroyed more ammo depots than Russia has is low. And even if that is the case, the Russians also have more munitions than the Ukrainians have. So generally speaking, it doesn't really affect much. It is of course a necessary step to do. Both sides, two military gain an advantage, they need to do this, and it does have an effect. But the effect is not enough for me to bother looking up the news and reporting on them, because I don't believe it hasn't big enough effect on the front line to actually report on it. And the final report is about the Wagner troops in Belarus and their presence there. From that, we see that the Wagner troops have also been sent to training centers by the city of Brest in western Belarus. And in response to that, the Polish army has sent armored units to the area on the Polish border, where they are also conducting training exercises. And there have been reports from local people that they're essentially hearing a lot of training day and night on both sides of the border. So there's been some tensions here by the western border of Belarus in response to the Wagner soldiers being sent there to train new Belarusian soldiers. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.